This story is dear to my heart and not so much. There's so much love and so much tragedy involved. But it's an amazing era in Guemes history, the Mangan era, which lasted from 1776 through, did I say 17?
That's false news.
1876 through 1910, actually. It was a short time. It starts out with a man by the name of Cephas Parker Woodcock. He was the patriarch of the family that you're going to hear about tonight. Everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. He was born in New York in 1815 and settled into Andrew County, Missouri after his wife Eliza died in childbirth. He practiced law, remarried, marriage of convenience, to Elizabeth Pearson, who was 14 years old, and she, the family says that she looks unhappy in every picture they ever saw. And Cephas never could give her the love that he gave to his first wife, which he never forgot. And Flora wasn't real happy with her mother either. She preferred the housekeeper to her mother in most cases. Cephas, 1861, the year of the Civil War, Cephas freed his slaves and became a captain in the Union Army. He was living in Missouri at that time, and that was a border state, which meant that there was about half Confederate and half Union. And it was, when you talk about some of the political troubles we have today, I don't know, maybe you've never heard of those. But the year of the Civil War was horrible for families who, especially on the border states, and even afterwards. And it turns out that Cephas' in-laws favored the South. And when the war was over, Confederate bitterness persisted. And one morning, Cephas found his prize stud had been throat had been slit, and there were other damages to crops, and it just came to a point where he had to get out, and he chose going west, and that's how it all started. The couple had 3 children at that time. Yeah, 3 children. Flora was the youngest. Let's go. Let's see if we can get that up there. Maybe not. Flora was the youngest. She was married to Tim Mangan, and he is here. Tim had been born in 1845 in Ireland, and he came to America at the age of 2. He joined the Union Army when he was 19. We don't have service records as yet, but it's even possible that he worked as a butcher in the Army, because that was his trade. Tim and Flora and their 3 children and her parents were part of a party of 17 that made the trip around the Horn. Do you believe that? Wow. They made them by train. And it's kind of funny when you study history a little bit. We had a business down in Tacoma, and it was a wonderful old back bar that cherry wood, and it was just beautiful. And it came around the horn, as you've shown, but that kind of stuff usually came on the train. But there are always rumors. Okay, where am I? They took the Transcontinental Railroad, which was pretty new at that time. They had a rail car, and they landed in Sacramento and transferred to San Francisco. And their rail car had all the household goods, the beds, rocking chairs, kitchenware, farm implements, all kinds of food that they ate on the way. And from San Francisco, the party made the boat trip up to Fidalgo, a little stop on Marshall's Point, with a intermediate stop in Seattle. And Seattle was a little village pretty much then. But they were met by pioneer Henry Yesler, who was really ambitious about building up the town. And he questioned all the men about their professions. And when he learned that Tim was an experienced busher, he offered the party acreage on Elliott Bay with a building and a slaughterhouse and a butcher shop. Not realizing the offer held their fortune in their hands, the Mangan party said they were going north. They landed at Fidalgo on Marsh Point, met by all the old bachelors, because someone had rumored that there was an unmarried woman in the group. And it was Flora's sister, Eliza, who was single, but not for long. The women, children, and goods were unloaded to stay at Bob Becker's house, and Bob Becker turned out to be Eliza's husband later. A place where the men hired an Indian canoe to take them up the Nooksack. They were interested in the Nooksack Valley, but it was too shallow for transporting their goods and unsuitable for Tim to set up shop. And also the natives weren't as welcoming as they had been told those on Guemes were. So they came to Guemes.
Remind us what year this is again.
Pardon?
Remind us what year this is again.
Okay, this is 1770.
No.
1876. Centennial year.
Great.
Okay, here we are. This is a map made in 1886, it was a little later. And here's the Woodcock locations. And you can see a little blacked out there, that was their home. And here down in, it says Guemes Post Office, here's the wharf. And the store would be here. I don't know, and the house was here, and here's the garden. And the other neighbor is the Blackentons. They had their garden here and a house there. And later, they had a wharf as well, because they became the post office.
Is that still that building that is there?
Say it again?
Is that still the building that is there, the post office building? Or is that just a rumor? On South Shore Drive,
The
about the second
That's
house.
that's the old Blackenton house that was moved from the beach, and part of it was supposedly the store
Oh, okay,
on the beach.
yeah.
So when, is that a section line or is that Guemes Island Road? Was there a Guemes Island Road?
There was a dedicated, yeah, it was dedicated,
Oh, yeah.
but you can see it ends right there.
Ah.
But yeah, that's the location of the future Guemes Island Road. That's right. Let's see. Yeah, they built that road in 1776.
No.
The selection of land for the Mangan woodcock spread came down to beautiful sloping southern exposure that offered potential development possibilities and an area destined for growth. And it was easily accessed by boat. Who knew that someday there'd be cars and more railroads? Apparently, it was Tim's plan to build a cabin, a wharf, a store, and to subdivide the property to sell lots. And let's go. And this is what it looked like probably in 1877. And we know that for two reasons. Here's the wharf, and they had to have that for the post office, for the mail boats. And Tim had applied for the postmastership in 1876 when they arrived apparently. This is the cottage that they built. It's all fenced in. I don't know if it was to protect from the animals or from the Indians, but as it turned out, occasionally groups of Indians would come and stay inside that fence on their way down to Puyallup to pick hops.
Where on South Shore Road is that, Lynn? Is that right where the store is now?
Yeah, actually, yeah, this building is located just about exactly where the tent is outside the store now, in that little pond down there,
Yeah,
just to the west of that.
okay.
That'll show up again in other slides here. Let's see, that's before. Working with nothing but hand tools and grit must have been challenging. I had to dig for water. We went down 96 feet for our well into the store. But we used a drill. It appears when this photo was taken, number 5, that's it. Yeah. Remarkable progress had been made, and we know from Postal Service documents that Tim had immediately applied for the post office, postmaster, for with a fine wharf, built served mailboat, office in the cabin, and a grand total of 56 island potential customers. And a quote number of off-island customers unknown. The Postal Service appointment office map, number 6. And this is real hard to see, but I'll just describe it.
When if you make it the big size, you can do that on the little icon there that goes to slide.
Oh, maybe you can.
Yeah, and no, it's on the corner, down there in the left hand, no,
Go up there, go up there.
left hand. My left hand, yours. Here's, when, if this is PowerPoint,
Down.
is it?
Yeah.
Over here, there should be a little thing. Here you go.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, I know, totally.
Not, well, I don't, here.
Yeah, it's not
Where's your-
touchscreen.
Here it is. Cursor.
So much trouble in the land.
Yeah.
Slideshow.
Oh, God.
That was the first total eclipse.
It's thinking.
It's now thinking. I'm sorry, obviously. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Miracle worker. We just had to be patient.
Okay, you can't see it probably, but this is Guemes Island right here. And here's Samish Island, and it has a dot on it for a post office. And Fidalgo has a dot for post office, but there's none for Anacortes. Notice that? But the other thing is, there's a dot here at Dead Man's Bay, and that was Humphrey Posey O'Brien's spread. He homesteaded most of Holiday Hideaway before it was, and he wanted a postmastership there, but he didn't have any means to build a wharf. So we think that he just got transferred over to Mangan. Okay, now, how am I gonna get back?
Try your right,
Hit the arrows.
use your right
Yeah.
arrow. Use your
There
right.
must be someone else here who knows.
Just use the
Use the
arrow
right
on the,
arrow on the keyboard, Win, on the
Oh,
keyboard.
guys know
Use
how
the
to
right
do this.
arrow.
Do you want me
Help
and Gary
him
to
out.
come up there?
Yay!
That goes back.
So that's your left arrow, I expect.
The
Use your
forward
right
arrow.
arrow.
Yeah, now one more time.
There you go.
Yay!
Okay, thank you all. Everybody's so patient.
Helpful.
Oh, okay, let's see. And, okay, so we know now where the post office was gonna be. Over the next few years, it appears that Tim's vision was paying off. The store was built above the wharf. That's it. And the island was growing. Mailboats and other busy mosquito fleet vessels were stopping by to pick up and deliver goods, including firewood for the steam boilers that would be stacked on that wharf waiting for them. Tim had set up the store operation with a hired manager, and he made his own deliveries and private business shipping, first with a small boat, the 10-ton sloop Top, and later a motorboat, the Evangel. And there were several newspaper notes in 1882 that I thought would be interesting. This would be 6 years into the Mangan enterprise in 1882. In May, T.B. Mangan has bought out all the sheep belonging to S.S. Best of Fidalgo Island, numbering 400 or 500. I like the precise numbers. In June, the Graham brothers had just filled an order of 50,000 shingles for Captain T.B. Mangan of Guemes. August, the upper portion of Mangan's store building will be arranged for a hall for public entertainment. You can see there is a second floor, and in the back there's a stairway on the outside. We'll see that in another slide. And I tell you, the more I think about it, the more amazing it is that we have these wonderful pictures from that era.
Yeah.
And I would just wish more families would have done that and saved them for the historical society. But in December, F.A. Graham and T.B. Mangan qualified this week as Justices of the Peace in and 4 precincts of Anacortes and Guemes, respectively, and are now patiently in wait for their first judicial victims. And in December, this is a busy year. December, T.B. Mangan has lately remodeled his dwelling into a hotel and is now prepared to accommodate the traveling public. And actually, poor Flora, she actually had quite a bit of experience by this time because she took care of the room and board for the men that were working the place. And of course, well, we'll go into that later. In June of 1883, Tim reportedly rented a pile driver to construct a substantial wharf. And the best we can find out about that was that there was an ice storm that tore out his original dock. And we don't know exactly when, but it would have been this era. there was something missing in all this progress, and it was Tim, usually. Sometimes he was in eastern Washington dealing cattle, other times in Seattle or Vancouver, BC, where the primary suppliers were located. He returned every couple of years to do his part in increasing the island's population. Flora, the acting postmaster, was now raising 6 children. Let's go.
Is he right?
Use your arrow.
Arrow.
Arrow on the keyboard.
Now.
Other way.
It's other way.
And back to
It takes a minute.
There we go.
Okay. This is not it. I'm sorry that's so blurry. That's the worst
Perfect.
picture we have. The children, Sina, Wally, Addie, Seffi, and Mabel, and Jerry Jr., about 1884, we figured. Okay. She was raising 6 children, overseeing the garden, orchard, livestock, keeping house, taking in boarders, and acting as the unofficial island nurse. She had her hands full. We can only speculate as to why Tim now encouraged his reluctant brother Jeremiah to come to Guemes to manage the store. They set up a partnership by the name of Mangan Brothers in 1883. Jerry would run the store, Tim would bring him the goods. He did hire Jeremiah, turned the store and its property over to him in the bargain. But it turned out to be no bargain for either one of them. For one thing, the settlement across the channel was no longer a collection of tents, shacks, muddy trails, and stump farms. Anacortes was growing fast. And the Mangan store, which had been neglected, was neglected even more under Jeremiah, due, he said, to his inability to raise capital to pay off supplier debts. And he was sick a lot. Another burden for Flora. By 1886, Tim had completely changed course, establishing a butchering business in Vancouver. About that time was when Jeremiah also changed course, undergoing a fanatical personality development and planned to take over all the property. He badgered Flora into signing a revocable deed of trust with Tim's reluctant approval, even though Flora had to go up to Vancouver and kind of talk him into it. Neither one of them really wanted to do it. But Jeremiah promised to surrender the deed at any time if asked. And who couldn't trust your brother? Court documents show that he immediately tried to mortgage the property on the strength of that deed. When his plans failed, he resorted to the savage, destructive acts such as plowing over Flora's garden, destroying the harvest, throwing rocks through the door of a honeysuckle cottage, while Flora and the children cowered inside. Finally, when Tim was home, Jeremiah climbed up on the roof and chopped holes, sending roofing, planks, and stove debris down into the kitchen. Witness, neighbor Lucius Blackington, told Tim some of the neighbors spoke about getting a gun and shooting Sir Jeremiah. Tim replied he could not have the blood of his brother on his hands. This all came out in the second trial. Those incidents resulted in the first lawsuit, in which Guemes Island new Justice of the Peace D.L. March ordered Jeremiah barred from the property. He also had to surrender the deed and pay $1,100 in damages. That name D.L. March, You know, Marsh Point was named after the Marsh family, but they were living here at the time. And if you remember, we've read the first community Christmas story, and the Marches were the ones that organized it. And we come back to Wallace Mangan, the kid in here. He's the one that rowed his boat with another friend to La Conner to buy presents for everybody on the island. And because the store didn't have that kind of merchandise. But I just love that story, the community Christmas, and we'll read it again this year. The original case under Peace Justice March was followed by a full trial in May of 1890, settled in October 2nd. About 150 pages of trial data, and that was not that was not the end of it. Tim decided to leave for Alaska. And Flora sent the two oldest boys up there to find out what was going on. And they came back and said, Tim is living as a single man, unquote. Flora successfully sued for divorce. She then had to struggle to exist as the Panic of 1893 sent the country into a total depression tailspin that lasted nearly 10 years. A hard life became even harder as she resorted to selling her vegetables, fruit, hand-churned butter in Anacortes, quote, where she was well and most favorably known. Have I missed anything here? Jeremiah disappears from our records after the trial. Flora's eldest child, Sephi, died in a diving accident in 1908. Flora then married Sephi's older best friend, Jack Kidd. That's not it. I'm sure I've shown these earlier. This is the honeysuckle cottage. In its later years, it was amended, remodeled for this bay window and a porch over the front. Looks totally different. Here's the livestock barn and outhouse, probably. Let's go back, even though this, I'm really ashamed of it. This is the store here. It was looking east from in front of the cottage, and see how it's all grown up with honeysuckle.
Is that a pet deer in the picture?
Pardon?
A pet deer there in the picture?
Yeah, that's a deer, and that's Flora back there. Let's see if there's another one here. No, that's. But.
Does that house still exist, Quinn?
Pardon?
That house doesn't still exist.
No, none of these buildings exist anymore. In fact, get to that. This is later after Tim had gone. This is Wallace Mangan, the ferry skipper, and once again, the whole front of the cottage is covered with honeysuckles and a roof over the porch. So the original cottage has changed completely. This was supposed to be shown earlier, but this is when the boys set up the Mangan Brothers store. And then Jack Kidd.
What was the outcome of the trial?
The trial pretty much
Oops, it skipped through all those photos.
One more.
One more
One
bad.
more we haven't
Listen.
talked about.
You can tell I rehearsed this for a long time.
I don't think the computer's helping you much.
No, it doesn't seem. Okay.
Okay, there's Jack Kidd, and this is one of the grandchildren, Flora's grandchildren with him. Where should we go now? In 1910, Flora learned that Tim had died. And she felt as a widow she could marry Grandpa Jack, which she did. Jack stayed on as a prominent farmer. No, excuse me. That's why. Jack stayed on as a prominent farmer in the community, living in the first house up the block here. He was a leader in the 1917 ferry campaign. He donated land for the community center. He made a bargain sale of a large portion of his land for this church. And he died in 1941. Flora's most famous offspring was this man here, Captain Wallace Mangan. He began working at the age of 15 on the tugboat ferry Iola, which served Guemes and Anacortes. He shortly became Commodore of the entire Blackball ferry fleet, and he ran the famous streamlined Kalakala on its maiden voyage in 1934 until his retirement. He served on every major ferry in the Blackball, now the state of Washington fleet, for 52 years, primarily on the wretched Seattle Bremerton and Port Orchard. And I've just recently rode the state ferry on those in good weather, without fog, and they were doing it without sonar or radar or anything. Anyway, the Seattle Bremerton Port Orchard routes making more than 50,000 round trips. And quote, has never had a mishap befall a vessel under his command, unquote. And that was in the Marine Digest. The community's regard for Flora was shared well beyond Guemes Island. As she was a member of the Order of Easter Star and the Rebecca, she took an active interest in the development of the island. She conducted Sunday school for the island and visiting residents, and her relationship with the native population was legendary. When an epidemic, quote, swept among the Indian inhabitants here, the death rate was appallingly high, unquote, reported the Bellingham Herald. As the scourge progressed, the Indians and many of the white settlers became panic-stricken to the point that some were left abandoned in their cabins. Then, quote, then it was Mrs. Kidd. Get up to that now. Then it was Mrs. Kidd. It showed her heroism of her soul for casting aside all fear and consideration of personal safety. She went among the ill and nursed many back to life and health. This was never forgotten by the Aborigines, who later generations always paid homage to her for her kindness and respect, unquote. And that is a much reduced version of the Mangan story. I might say we had about 50 Mangan family on the island in 1909 for a reunion. And that's where I learned quite a bit from the family. I've been in contact.
It must have been 2000.
2009. Oh, excuse me.
Very consistent.
What's a century?
Yes, that's right. English is,
Give or
Okay.
take.
My dad was born in 1896, and that's true. So I have a little trouble with the centuries.
That group came to the island for a reunion?
Yes,
Oh, nice.
yeah. I published a picture of them in the Evening Star. They're quite a group. A couple of them live in Anacortes. And in fact, they commissioned Bill Mitchell to build a Mangan, what do you call it?
Mural.
Mural.
Mural, yeah.
And it's at the store on the cabin of Flora. Yeah, so it's a great remembrance for her, I think.
Yeah.
But we're also going to, at least I would like to do, is change the sign at the landing to indicate that it was 1876. Because we're way ahead of Anacortes. We should. Okay. Now, if I remember what's on here. Okay, talked about the ferry landing. Yeah, the wharf, Magnan Wharf. And this is pretty objectively believed to be the location. If you remember back in the very first slide, it showed the wharf, and part of the base was a crib that was was full of rocks and timber, and it's long gone, but the remains of the rocks, which all field stones that probably came while they were building the place, is still there. And recently, I was talking to Willie McWaters, who works in the store, and he's had an interest in what was there, and I told him the only thing that remains of the old store is this, what I call man-made reef. But, and so he pondered on that, and then he started going down there, and on one trip, he found a short piece of log sticking out. And he called me up and he said, "Well, I think I found part of the old dock." I said, "Yeah, 140 years later, you found some wood." Okay. So anyway, I went over there and took a look, and it has to be somewhat of a low tide, but right in here, there's this little piece of wood sticking out of the ground. And there it is. And it just looks like a log, and it is. It's a sound log. But it had some indication that it had been worked by somebody. So we got a shovel and a pick and went down there and looked further and exposed. And
Wow.
The these are the mortises for tenons. And in this one, you could just barely see it. There's a pin that goes through there. Mortise and tenon joint, never use metal. It's always a wooden pin. Also, in boat building, they call them trunnels, or tree nails. And this was, there's one right there, it's those, and it's, the work is just crude enough and just beautiful enough to indicate that somebody knew what they were doing. But it turns out that we didn't. Exactly. We're not sure, but there's some, I don't see if I've got another one here. No, that's it. It turns out that Marv Schultz remembers there being another wharf on the same spot in the 50s, the 1950s. That's island resident who had a sawmill would use for shipping lumber. So we don't know. It looks, the log is just so in such perfect shape. It's obviously being buried in the surf like that helped preserve it, whether it's 60 years old or 140 years old. But well, we think we can figure it out by getting in touch with the USGS because they monitor the beaches, and there should be a wharf showing up on one of their maps, kind of like, not like that, but that other one. So that's where we are. It was a wonderful discovery, even if it's only 60 years old.
When would you go back to the slide where you can see down the beach?
What was that on, excuse me, yes, go ahead. Is that on the west side of the existing ferry landing?
East,
That's
East.
all the way back
Thought it was
around.
east.
about 450 feet.
What, it was fun.
See it.
Now, if you looked at that,
Oh, I want to show you something else. It's really hard to see in this picture, but right here is the only image that I know of from the era of an Indian and a canoe, the prow of a canoe. And that, to me, that makes this one of the most precious period photographs on Guemes Island. And then, of course, here's that crib I was talking about. And you can see some of the workers around, and that's about it. Okay, now, what did you want?
Well, wait, first, where did that photograph come from?
Well, it came from the Mangan family, but I can't, I don't know where it is right now, the original.
It looks like the island had already been logged pretty well.
Oh, yeah.
By then.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, there was,
1886,
Sure.
so
My part of the island was logged in the 1870s, Seaway Hall. Yeah. The Eden's family, hear about it?
one thing on this photo here, you can see the bracing.
Yeah.
You've got a straight upright here, and you've got bracing running down at an angle. And if you notice the pictures, the Wynn's log down there has a notch here and a notch here. And I don't know whether, if we could figure out what these angles were, whether those would fit those notches.
So Wynn, where was the shipyard? Was it on the other side of what we think of as the ferry dock? The shipyard.
Yeah,
oh, the
west.
shipyard, yeah.
Wasn't that on the, was it to the west of the current ferry dock?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the
Blackenden's property.
property,
Right.
most of it,
Right.
much of it. Okay, well, there was one other,
Well, I just asked if you would show that slide that had the original beach wharf.
okay, yeah, got it.
because I don't have my bearings straight when I'm looking at it.
So we don't know what happened to Jerry?
I say it in every newsletter. I say it in every newsletter. No, I say that in every newsletter.
So, in the background of that, in the water, is that, not the current ferry dock?
Yeah.
Yes, it's-
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why I took that pictures for identifying, to get the distance. It's about 400 feet from here to the ferry.
Good, thank you.
Okay, that's all I got. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, thank you so much.